Okay, in previous lectures, we've talked about perception specific to design principles, how we see and how that relates to the different ways we can design graphics. This time we're going to talk about how visual strategies actually rank according to how accurately you can extract information from them. Just like you need to learn spelling and grammar before you can write well, you need to learn fundamentals of perception and design principles before creating effective data visualizations. Luckily, researchers have already done lots of studies on which visual cues work and which ones don't, so you don't have to start from scratch. And one of the most referenced and truly helpful bits of research was done by William Cleveland and Robert McGill. Actually, it was at the time of this recording, this paper has been referenced 1,829 times. In 1984, they released this paper titled Graphical Perception: Theory, Experimentation, and Application to the Development of Graphical Methods. There's a PDF on Canvas. They asked hundreds of people to look at hundreds of charts and asked them questions like, which bar is longer? Which area is bigger? How much bigger is this circle than that circle? If this color is 50, what value does this shade of the color represent? And things like that. The result is a ranked list of how accurately humans can decode a wide variety of visual cues. And this is the quintessential figure that resulted from their research. It's a visual legend showing the ranking of encoding types. The top end are methods humans can accurately assess, and the bottom end are like the low precision information extraction methods. They're better suited for showing trends and generalizations. So the different ways we can encode data include position along a scale. That's the examples here at the top. Lengths, directions, angles, area, volume, and shading and color saturation. This research isn't opinion-based. It's not personal preference or taste. It's based on experimentation and testing and a lot of research on human visual perception. Why is this important? If it's important that your viewer is able to make an accurate judgment about the data in your chart, then use graphic forms that are high on the list. A bar chart, for example, is always going to be superior to a bubble chart or a heat map if the goal of the graphic is to facilitate precise comparisons. And we're going to talk more about accurate reading and effectiveness rankings coming up. But let's walk through some examples. So when we read scatter plots, we're looking at the positions of all the observations along a common scale. Here's the common scale in the X, here's the common scale in the Y. And so what we're doing is evaluating how far over, what's the position along this scale. So scatter plots have two. And by the way, what do you think of this idea using the state abbreviations as the point marker? I think it's pretty slick because you can see the density and it doesn't really matter where it's most dense, where they overlap, but it's really easy to identify the outliers quickly. Yeah, I kind of like this. So over here on the left, you're going to see we're going to look at like position along a common scale. These are the most accurate types to be able to decode, going down to the least most effective. Okay, position along an identical but unaligned scale. This is what we're looking at here. This is called a small multiple. It's also called a trellis plot. It's actually part of, I think, one. I might have cropped it down. But the idea is the X and Y axes are identical throughout all the plots, but different observations, different sets of observations are plotted on each little mini chart. It's very easy to make a side-by-side comparison. Humans are good at extracting accurate information from multiples like this, just slightly less so than in the first example because it's a little bit more complex. That makes sense. Okay, third down the list, length. This is a fun plot about Nathan's hot dog eating contest out on the East Coast. Big lack of data here between 1916 and 1972. But the idea is our ability to detect the differences accurately between lengths is very strong if there's a continuous baseline, a consistent baseline at the bottom. World records were broken when the bars are colored green. Just, I think this is a nice example of a plot that introduces a lot of extra information and makes the chart a lot more interesting because it's directly annotated, including pictures of somebody with a hot dog hanging out of his mouth. Okay, fourth down the list, angle and slope. So the pie chart really isn't that bad when you rank it among everything else. Top 10 countries with the most confirmed COVID-19 cases as of March 8th, 2020. A lot of things about this plot that we wouldn't applaud in any way, including the fact that it doesn't start at high noon. It wraps a little bit backward, but we'll take it. Okay, angle and slope. These are slope plots. They're pretty slick, but the idea is these are great for a general sense or a trend, but we're not going to go trying to figure out the difference between slope here and here. Our brain isn't calculating that. It's just telling us more or less, but we're not going to accurately be able to detect what's the difference between this slope and this slope. We can only see that this is a little bit steeper, I think. So that's what we're getting at there when we talk about angle and slope. Good for trends, really difficult to extract specific angle or slope amounts from. Area, getting down on the list of being able to accurately detect. We can tell which ones are bigger, but we can't tell how much bigger. We can't put a number on this. If we were just even going to try and divide up what proportion of the whole reptiles is, we'd have a really hard time knowing if that's a third or a fifth. It's very difficult. It gives us an overall sense. Volume, density, color saturation, tied for sixth most accurate. We've seen examples of volume before. Density examples are things like in the scatter plot. We might be able to detect differences in regression, fit, things like that. We just can't say exactly how much tighter. We just might be able to get an overall sense. And same with color saturation. We can see overall trends, and that's about it. We can't say this is twice as dark as this, or 3 times as dark, and that would even be a generalization. Okay. And then the least accurate is color hue. This is probably a really bad example because it's intuitively color-coded and there's a fairly big difference between these colors. But we're not going to be able to say that this is worth 70 and this is worth 20. So it's about accurately extracting, quantities or values. You're going to see this effectiveness ranking written up in a whole bunch of different ways. People have reproduced it lots of times. It's a great thing to kind of commit to memory because it's not that complicated. It's just the idea that if you want your audience to be able to extract actual values like 73% or 253, not just this is bigger than that, make sure you're using bar charts, lollipop charts, scatter plots, and things like that. The rest of these are much better for just generalizations. All right, so getting into the weeds a little bit. The way their research worked, these are the kinds of plots they showed people, and they said, how much bigger is this bar than this bar? So they were asking audiences to compare the quantities in the elements that are marked with the 2 little dots. So type 1, they're right next to each other on a common baseline. Type 2, there's a space but no distractors between, common baseline. Here, common baseline, distractors in between. How much bigger is this than this? Type 4, and I point this out because there's a break here. Here we don't have a common baseline anymore, so the comparison is a little bit different. And just so you can see, here what we're doing is we're decoding or we're reading position along a common scale. So we have a common baseline, but we're reading the position along the y-axis for these. For these, we have to do a different kind of decoding. Here we're looking at the length, or maybe even the area of this versus this, and in this case, this area versus this area. So a length and an area decoding versus position along a common scale. And here's the data broken down. Oh, I thought I had a thing covering this up that just basically said increasing error. Don't worry about the actual numbers down here. The point of this is to show you this break. So when we move from position along a common scale to comparing lengths or areas, the error increases quite a bit. There isn't a huge difference between when you've got two positions along a common scale, when you've got two heights with a little gap or a gap with distractors. There isn't a big difference here. There is a sizable jump when they're right next to each other, you get the lowest error. But there's a big gap here when you take away the position along a common scale and go to comparing lengths or areas instead. Okay, so the effectiveness of encoding methods, position, length, these are the most likely to extract specific and correct numeric information, and then area, volume, and hue or color are the least likely to be able to extract specific and correct information, but better at conveying trends or patterns.